Welcome to Radio Horror tonight here at WCW, as we are going to be discussing Aliens Expanded, which is a documentary that came out last year. It is a 4.5 hours, right, Ian?
Well, if you add the credits, on which there are videos to play over the credits, it's just over 5.
Okay, so it's about 5 hours. We'll give it the whole 5 hours, 5 hours of your life, which you will be better off doing nothing else but watching this documentary, especially if you're a giant Alien fan or Aliens fan. We don't get anything others. We're not getting an Alien Romulus. Just kind of coincidence. It did come out around the time Alien Romulus came out, so it was a good plug for that movie, too. We have the director of this documentary on the show with us, who's going to be working on The Thing Expanded coming up soon. Ian Nathan, who's also the author, by the way, of the Peter Jackson The Making of Middle-earth book, too.
I am.
Yes?
I get around.
You seem to have this long history in film, but your IMDb credits are so small. So I'm like, is there more that you have worked on besides what we've seen on IMDb?
Well, I come from a journalistic background, so I was on a magazine called Empire. Do you know Empire?
Of course I do. Yes.
Yeah, I was on Empire for 25 years. So if you're looking for the missing part of my CV, that is it.
Wow. 25 years at Empire. That's amazing. I mean, Empire is the one who breaks the news every 5 minutes. Like, oh, look, the trailer's coming out for, Fantastic Four First Steps, and here's the photos before the trailer comes out. And you're like, oh, look at that. Look how awesome the thing looks. Things like that.
It was different, kind of different in my day. Well, certainly when I started. I was discussing this the other day. When I started on Empire, which is 1994, we didn't have email, let alone social media, let alone the internet. We got our copy on pieces of paper that were faxed. Yeah, that's how long ago it was.
Oh, it must have been great working at a magazine like that so many years ago before the internet really kind of took down the magazine industry, huh?
It was great. I mean, also that was when they released films in America 6 months before they released them in the UK. So you got a real idea of what was going on. We had 6 months lag. It's different times. It's very different times. And one of the reasons why I think I finally left Empire, which was about 10 years ago. And for many better things. But, the digital world had just overtaken everything. And I just couldn't get the pleasure out of it anymore. As you say, everything had to be breaking story now, the trailer of this. And just the kind of standing back and loving something had gone from it. And, that's kind of where my heart was.
When did you first ever see Aliens?
Yeah, well, I saw it on release in 1986.
I kind of figured. I didn't want to age you, but I thought I would.
I know, it's shocking. No, I'd seen Alien on video, VHS, but that's how old I am as well. I saw it in the same afternoon I saw The Thing, so that was a good afternoon.
Oh, wow.
But obviously, so I was kind of, as conscious I could be of a sequel, because, again, pre-internet days, but I'd seen the trailers and I'd seen some stuff on TV, probably seen Starlog and some of the American mags. And I pretty much had to see it. It wasn't like a debate. It wasn't an issue. But I got my dad to take me. And it was a cinema called the Odeon Cinema chain in Fulham Road in London. And I remember sitting in a very full cinema. And the bit where Burke shuts the door on Ripley and Newt, as all hell is breaking loose, the end game section. This guy at the back of the cinema just shouts out, "You!" And he just shouted out across the cinema, and there's this kind of a ripple of laughter kind of to release the tension. Mm-hmm. And I thought, God, he's forgotten he's watching a film. He's just lost control of his emotions. He's so into it that he's just said it out loud into the cinema. And I even knew even then, this film has a grip on people like very few other films. He's so caught up with it. And we all got back into the film very quickly after that. But I remember that so clearly. And that's Aliens, wasn't it? Aliens was so gripping, and it was just ridiculously relentless. And the power of it in that moment, and seeing it in cinema was just amazing.
Couple things. Did you know that Marvel Comics, which publishes the Alien comic books now here in the States, they published a What If Burke Lived?
Yes. No, Paul Reiser spoke about this when I interviewed him for the movie.
Oh, that's right. Okay, it is in that.
Yes.
I did remember. Okay, I do remember that now. Yeah.
Yeah, he talked briefly about, I think it was more extensive stuff than we put in the film, but about how he's been involved in that. And
yeah, he co-wrote it.
Yeah. And he liked this idea of Burt getting a second chance, because obviously if you know the film, cut scenes, There's a cut scene of his death, that he's kind of been entombed by the aliens. And
Right.
Ripley comes across him on her way to rescue Newt, and she hands him a grenade, and that was cut from any cut of Aliens, but it exists on some of the Blu-rays. And he loved the fact that that didn't make it. So it was always ambiguous what happened to Burke, and there could be a second life for him. So yeah, and he always felt, again, you watch the documentary, he thinks Burke's a little misunderstood. He gets bad rep. So it's a chance to redeem Burke on some level.
He's responsible for the death of 20,000 colonists, but sure, he gets a bad rap. It's kind of funny with Paul Reiser how he comes full circle, because I don't know much about Paul Reiser beyond like just the show he did in the 90s and Aliens, and then a couple other things. But it's funny that Aliens science fiction movie, he kind of he was on My Two Dads, but you know what I'm saying. So Alien, start of his career, and then it's come around now where his career is back in science fiction with Stranger Things.
Yeah, and he was only cast in Stranger Things really because of Aliens.
Of course, obviously.
That reference point, and I think he's baffled by it. Yeah, you watch him. He said he doesn't really know why he was in Aliens. To this day, he's a bit unsure why James Cameron wanted to cast him, because Cameron had seen him in Beverly Hills Cop.
Right, Beverly Hills Cop had just come out too, yeah.
And I think Cameron just wanted a guy with a different energy, because he was going to be the oddball, he was going to be the odd man out, and obviously the guy we distrust. And Cameron just liked that everyone else, all the other males in the film are Marines, and they are clearly tough guys, and you just needed someone else that brought a different, I wouldn't say wimpy, but a kind of different dynamic.
And there's also a Thing video game remastered that just came out.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? The afterlife of these films and the afterlife of all of this. One of the reasons I'm making these documentaries is the eternal life that these things have. That people keep loving them and going back to them. And there's an eternal fascination with them. And they're two films that particularly have kind of lodged themselves in the zeitgeist.
One of the things that I absolutely loved about your documentary is that you guys gave great credit to those who have passed away, as many as you could. Now, I understand there is like a crew of like over a couple hundred people that work on a film. You know what I mean? You're never going to get every single itty bitty little person. But it's great that you get like all the living cast members. You got every living cast member, right? Did I leave anyone out? Okay. But, I was really looking forward to, everyone shouting out to Bill, because I've spoken to Michael Biehn multiple times about Bill or whatever, and he's like, if there's one person who died that affected the film industry so much, it was him, and nobody ever had a bad thing to say about Bill, and he was always a stand-up guy, and he was so beloved. So that was great that he got his due, because I feel like he didn't get that in Twisters. So
no, he did, ignored completely in Twisters. That was kind of clear to me from setting out that, Al Matthews was very important to our discussion, obviously because he's Apone, but Bill was the big one, and Bill was kind of, who doesn't, remember him so well from that film, and every line is so quotable that we adore Hudson. And I thought, well, I obviously can't interview him. That's the one thing that's impossible to me. And so from the very beginning, it was clear that we needed to honour him. And really, it became very easy in the sense that as soon as I mentioned him to every interviewee, they just started telling me stories, and they started really kind of getting quite emotional about it. And I thought, this is just great. And it was one of the pieces that we edited fairly soon in the edit, and didn't change much at all. I added a bit of Cameron because he was one of the later interviews. But beyond that, it just had this lovely cadence. Mark Rolston at the end sort of finishing it. And it was just sort of a gift, really. It wasn't of my making. It was absolutely the interviewees who gave it to me. We just put it together. And you need, one thing I've realised about documentary making, this might sound a bit contradictory, is that it's quite an emotional format. Although it's factual, you need emotions, and you need sort of cadences that follow emotion, and humour as well. You need those to drive you through. As we said at the beginning, this is a long documentary, So you need more than just information. You need emotion, and you need performance, and you need humor. And you get all of that, I hope, in Aliens Expanded.
When when you let me start over. When you were
Yeah.
going through the format, how this film was going to be structured, was it obvious that it was going to go, okay, so script to this is when we shot this scene in the movie and so on and so forth? Because you don't shoot a movie in the order you see the film, but you went through the film like the actual continuity order,
Yeah.
which I thought was great. And sometimes some documentaries don't do that. They jump around, but I was glad that you did. Instead of going through the shooting schedule, you went through the continuity
Yeah.
kind of the film.
Well, one thing that I was very conscious of, and Robin, my producer, was very
Yep.
conscious of
I know, Robin.
that. You know, Robin,
Yep.
that we didn't want it to be a making of. We knew it would include a lot of making of.
Uh-huh.
The documentary itself wouldn't be a making of, because there's great making ofs already in existence on Aliens. Superior Firepower is terrific, and so I was kind of very conscious it can't be just that soup to nuts. Here's how the script was written. Here's what happened. And obviously, I knew you can't quite escape the hold of that as well. So it's kind of a wrestling match. But the concept for the expanded format was kind of clear that we were going to follow the chronology of the film, so the events you see on screen in the fictional universe of the film, and then draw back from those back into the making of those things. So each section of the film, each chapter moves forward chronologically, but you'll be able to use that chapter to tell the story and appreciate the film. And so inevitably, the opening chapter is about salvage, isn't it? It's about salvaging the remains of Alien to carry on the story. So immediately that lends itself to us going, well, let's talk about Alien and how Cameron wrote the script, because it's a salvage story. So you get a kind of an element of kind of the film gives you things back. There's an element where all the Marines kind of are introduced on screen. So that's the point in the documentary. You sort of introduce the characters of the Marines and their kind of casting and their stories. It's a tricky business because certain things are delayed in the storytelling and certain things are held back because you're following the film, as you say, and not the simple how we made it. But I hope we get somewhere. You move around a lot within the world of the film, and you kind of orbit around it. And one of the toughest things to do was jump from one subject to the next. It sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but I learned that in documentaries, when we don't have a voiceover, because that stylistically we don't, it's really hard to jump from one thing to the next, one subject to the next. And you have to rely on clips to do it, and your interviewees to do it, and the music to do it. So it's a real jigsaw puzzle to kind of do that. But the timeline was all important. The timeline is the backbone of what it is. So as soon as you finish a subject, at least you can go whizzing back to the timeline and go, okay, now it's this sequence, and now it's this sequence. And with The Thing, which I'm doing now, far less happens in The Thing than in Aliens, and that's stylistically the nature of the film. So it's really interesting about how we work with the timeline on that one when far less is going on. So in some ways in The Thing, we're drawing even further away from the chronology of the film, but then we have to go back to it. So it's tricky, I will say that, but it kind of works, I think.
What is your favorite scene in Aliens? And were you ever a collector of any of the merchandise that has come out connected to, let's just keep it to the first two films. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's so many weird xenomorphs out there. It's like, how does a facehugger get on a bug? I don't, like, whatever.
Yeah, I haven't. I have to confess, I haven't really followed the kind of the extended universe particularly. I've kind of looked into it, obviously I did for the documentary, and I wrote a book called Alien Vault a few years ago about the making of the original, the Ridley Scott film. So I did a lot of research.
Right,
at that
I
point.
have that one too. I have the vault. That you're talking about that book that's kind of like a museum in the palm of your hands, right? Little things you can take out, and play with, and fold. I love that. I love finding stuff. Like I have a Star Wars one, and I'm gonna bust it at the seams at some point. But every time there's like a new cereal box or a napkin to something, I grab one and I stick it in there, and it's just filled with extra stuff from like the sequel era or the, you know what I mean, like the other prequels that have come out.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not as big a collector as I used to be. As a kid, I was avidly.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because you move house and you've got to
I gotcha.
rationalize, and
Yeah.
all those things
Space.
come into play. And I have like a gazillion books, which every time I move apartment, the kind of moving people just hate me because all the boxes are really heavy. But I've not. No, I tell you what, I did. I got this habit now. I buy myself a new mug. Sounds very simplistic, but I buy myself a new mug now for each documentary. So I've got an Aliens mug with all the. It's got the readout of all the character names on it, and I love that. And I'm getting a Thing mug to go with Thing. So I do commemorate the stuff I'm doing, but I've not been an avid collector. But as to your other part of your question was, do I have a favourite scene? I do. I mean, in terms of the documentary, it's only part of the section of the documentary. But the bit I love and still gives me a rush every time I watch the film, and I can tell you I've watched it a lot, is Ripley taking charge. I think it's the most pivotal moment in the film because it's her sort of setting aside her trauma and doing the thing Ripley does, which is take charge. She is the natural leader, even though she resists that. And it's the point where the Marines have gone into the nest. It's all gone wrong. The aliens have ambushed them basically, and they're watching. It's a brilliantly orchestrated scene by Cameron. It's kind of Ripley, Newt. It's William Hope and Gorman. They're all watching on the screens in the APC, and then Ripley just going, get them out. Get them out, Gorman. And he's just cracking up, under the pressure. He's cracking up. And she takes charge. She stops listening to the order of command and guides the APC and smashes into the nest. And I still love that. I love it from the point she takes charge to the point where, it's Hicks is going, wind down, you're going to break the transaxle. That whole sequence to me is just the center of the film.
With the documentary, what was the thing that took the longest to get finished besides, let's say, the editing? I'm assuming once you had all the interviews, the editing was just like puzzle piecing it together, unless I'm wrong. But what was the biggest thing trying to get accomplished with this documentary?
The hardest thing is it's a relationship between doing the edit and while you're still trying to get talent. You're trying to get the interviews, and obviously Aliens includes some very big stars and an extraordinarily important director in the world of Hollywood. So, we were circling Sigourney and James Cameron for quite a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're James Cameron and Sigourney Weaver. That's just the nature of the beast. So I had to conceive of versions of the documentary that wouldn't have them in because they may have said no. And I had to still make a film. So that was very tricky. So there are cuts done where they are kind of more subjects of the film than participants. But once Cameron said yes, I had to kind of really reorganize a lot of the film in a good way because suddenly I had this kind of fabulous interview with him, and it kind of changed the complexion of the film. In a strange way, it brought a lot of humour to the film. It was unexpected. And then the last interview we got was Sigourney Weaver, and that was an easier, because once I had my structure there and I knew she was coming, I knew where I'd put her in, and the interviewers worked according to the needs of the film. But that transformation of getting Cameron was probably the hardest thing to negotiate because, it was a brilliant thing, but it made, the whole documentary kind of turn on its head a little bit and become different. You were kind of discussing something and now they were part of the film. So it's very odd for people to go talk all about James Cameron and he's the next clip. So you have to kind of start reordering and doing things. So it was that relationship between getting the main talent and the cut we were doing at the time.
The film that you're working on next is going to be The Thing Expanded. Is there anything you can talk about with that?
Yeah. Basically, it's a sort of spiritual sequel to Aliens Expanded. In a sense, it's taking a similar structure. We're going to follow the chronology of the film, as I said, and do the same thing. In a sense, we're going to go into the film and explore its making, explore why it endures, explore why it turned from a flop into a classic, explore the fictional world of the film, and what makes the thing very different from Aliens, and what I think will make it a very different documentary to Aliens, is that obviously when you watch Aliens, what you see is what you get in a really good way. Cameron doesn't hide things. He shows you what's going on. I mean, he doesn't show you what the aliens are kind of doing, but he tells you the whole of the human story. Whereas with The Thing, it's so ambiguous and it's so full of mystery, following who is infected when, following all the kind of debates that surround the film. Who attacks the blood supply, who is the shadow on the wall, at what point do people get infected, and right down into these kind of really noodly things about someone is infected with the thing. Do they know they're infected with the thing? Are they just taken over? Is the thing sentient? It's this wonderful kind of tapestry of ambiguities in the film, which we will tackle in the documentary. But I do hasten to add on top of that, I don't expect to come up with an answer to any of that, because the joy of the thing is not having an answer to all those kind of wonderful questions. We're going to try and answer them, but I'm not going to say we're going to give anything definitive, because you're not meant to. Like, you're not meant to know whether MacReady or Childs at the end are infected or not. You're just meant to think about it. So I think it'll be quite a different film in that respect. I've done 15 interviews so far. I've done Carpenter, done a great guy called Stuart Cohen who produced the film, who was really the guy who put it all together. I've done most of the cast. And so it's all coming together really well, but I do feel it's a different story and a different kind of film. So while it will have the same format, I think it's going to be a very different documentary.
And that's the biggest thing about The Thing versus Aliens. Ridley Scott gave us the explanation where the aliens come from. The engineers created them through their DNA osmosis, blah, 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 blah. If that's what the continuity is, and that's what Disney is sticking with, according to Romulus, FYI, so it's still in continuity for anyone who hates Prometheus. The Thing, I've never read the original short story. I've seen the Howard Hawks movie from the 50s.
Yeah.
But they never explain where the Thing came from. What planet? What is its species? Are there more of those out there? Because, good God, we're in trouble in the film if there are. Never, they never explain where it comes from, right? They just think it's from space. Even the prequel film, which came out in 2011, I believe.
Yeah. It's great though, isn't it? I think not knowing is one of the beauties of The Thing, in the sense that Alien, as you say, is tied to a mythology, and almost I think kind of they've got a bit lost in their mythology as the years have gone on. But it's almost a bit more like Star Wars in that respect, in that it has a kind of world in which it fits, and it kind of goes backwards and forwards through this huge timeline. Whereas The Thing is really like a 70s film. It's only concerned with the now. It's the crisis in front of these men. So this creature, this alien, and we don't quite know what it is. Is it like a virus? Is it like an infection? Is it a multicellular organism we just never see?
Right.
It's changed form. All these things.
We never see its original form, too.
True. Yeah, we just don't know. And that's the joy of the film, is that it doesn't matter. It's all about how these men cope or don't cope with the crisis. And that's one of the problems with the prequel, is that it's trying to show things we don't need shown. It's trying to answer questions we haven't asked. It's that's what's difficult.
Here's one thing I hope your film might do one day, and who knows? I mean, I understand studio films are so tight budgeted these nowadays because of the pandemic and the strike, and now because of a lot of restrictions being put on by the president to other countries. But there's still that unreleased original version of the prequel thing with all the the better effects, not the CGI, and I guess it's still kind of sitting out there. There's a work print cut or something, and maybe we'll get to see that one day. Who knows? Maybe that's what your documentary will wake up someone I guess it's Disney. Disney owns it.
Yeah, I don't know. Nobody it's Universal.
I'm sorry, it's Universal. Sorry.
But I don't know whether someone. It's like
Disney owns Alien. Sorry, that's what I was thinking of.
I think studios don't like to admit they were wrong.
Yeah. That brings up another good question. Did you have any problems with Disney trying to get this documentary released?
No, I mean it's obviously the documentary is a love song to aliens.
Okay, so they didn't fire back against anything, like any kind of like, you got to change this, otherwise no go. Or are you protected because
not
you're
at
in
all.
the
I
well?
think
Are you protected because you're in the
I,
United Kingdom? Is it because it's educational?
it's I can't speak for Disney, obviously.
Okay.
But in terms of from our side, it falls under fair usage. We get it legaled quite heavily, before we put it for the reasons you're kind of intimating, is that you don't want to piss off the studio.
Right.
And I think you just they had Alien Romulus coming out, and I think they kind of fell. And I don't know this because I haven't spoken to Disney about it. It fell into a good place for them.
Okay.
Cameron was involved, Sigourney was involved, so they kind of look at that and go, well, this is just adding to the colour of this Alien universe. And they've got Alien Romulus, and a sequel to that will be happening. They've got Alien Earth coming shortly in a couple of months.
Yeah.
So they're probably thinking, this is all grist to the mill, this is all good. And there was a kind of 4K version of Aliens that arrived around about the same time as us.
Uh-huh.
So if you're Disney, you're just thinking, well, we've had to do nothing of this, and this documentary exists, and we've just done. And from our side, we have fair usage. We have done it in the sense of we've honoured the rules and the laws. We haven't held on to clips. Every clip answers a question, which is kind of editorial use. So it's a happy world, I think, in the sense that we are just curating a love of film. We're not attacking these films. We're not finding controversy. So it would be a very, it's kind of a good place to be to make documentaries. And I can't speak for studios, so I'm a bit hesitant, really.
Right.
But it's the film that we make is very much put into fandom, and I think fandom is greatly respected by the studios these days, especially on properties like The Thing and Aliens.
I've got some projects that I'm working on that I pitched to Robin, and he kind of passed on them.
Yeah.
It's not really his company's thing. They're comic book adjacent. They're heavy comic book adjacent documentaries about the creators who've worked on comic books that have passed away, and like who they were as people. Yeah. And we have to use clips here and there. You know what I mean? We got to use like Captain America clips for Mark Gruenwald because he wrote the character for 10 years, and we got Bernie Wright's in. We're gonna be using some Swamp Thing stuff. So I'm also kind of like wondering like, what am I allowed to do? What am I allowed to say? What am I allowed to use? But the thing is, we've also figured out we're gonna have the people that we're interviewing talking over the clips, so the clips audios aren't actually being used. So it's kind of something someone told me to try and do. You know what I mean? So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, what I would suggest is just get yourself a lawyer.
Easier said than done.
I know, but there are people who are very good at telling you what line you can what's works as fair usage and what doesn't, and there were various things that we couldn't do and we didn't do. But the film you watched is what we could do. So it's about how you do it in a sense. You need professionals to tell you these things because
I got you.
I'm not an expert on copyright law, but
it's different for you versus me. So
yeah,
talk a little bit about your Peter Jackson book before we let you go.
Okay, yeah. Well, when I was at Empire, which obviously, as we've already mentioned, goes back a long way. The Lord of the Rings films kind of got flagged up. It's probably about 1997, maybe. The hints into 98 that something was going on in New Zealand and they were going to do this impossible thing and film The Lord of the Rings. And I, probably like you and probably like a million people out there, millions of people out there, had read the book when I was 14 years old and hid within that book as a kind of shy young teenager. Had moved on really, but as soon as that film came up, I did come something I didn't usually do at Empire. I bullied my way into covering it because I just wanted to do it, and I kind of threw my weight around a bit, and I got onto the film, and very luckily and very privileged, I went out to New Zealand, and was on the set, and I met Jackson, who's a great guy, and he loved Empire. He's a real geek in the sense that he loves kind of film mags, and he loves that kind of appreciation of it, and all that's kind of written into the DNA of the films. And I just got on really well with him. I think, we'd had similar childhoods. I mean, he made more of his than I have.
Yeah.
But we grew up on Doctor Who and Tintin, and so we had very kind of similar kind of attitudes. And so I went back to New Zealand many times through the making of the films and the Hobbits as well. And I got to the end of it when it was all kind of winding down, and I had all this material, and I'd done everything I did for Empire, but I had so much more. And I just kind of went to Jackson and I sort of said, look, I'd love to write a book about the making of these films. And I really said, I don't want to write a book about elves or magic rings or Tolkien. That's all incidental. I want to write a book about what you did, about filmmakers climbing Everest. And he said, yeah, okay. But, there's numerous amounts of sort of hoops I had to jump through involving HarperCollins and the Tolkien estate and the publisher and all those kind of things, but I did jump through them. And Jackson then gave me access to his archive. I mean, he's kept everything, every call sheet, all this paperwork. It's not just he kept some of the models. He's got the whole thing. And gave me great access to himself. I did lots more interviews because obviously I had his approval. And just then set out to write this book, which, bless them, HarperCollins allowed me to write it probably twice the length I intended to write. What was it? They said, Tolkien always said, the tale grew in the telling. And I think I'm about 2/3 of the length of Lord of the Rings, my word count. I didn't go quite as bad as Lord of the Rings, the actual novel. And it just, it was just a great expression of what I wanted to say. I don't know if you've ever read the book Final Cut, which is about the kind of making of Heaven's Gate and the disaster of it.
Oh, no, I haven't, but I have heard of it, so.
Yeah, it's a lovely book. Read it. It's a terrific, beautifully written book. That was kind of my guiding light in a way.
Gotcha.
But I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write the Final Cut, but it all went right at the end. That was the other, that's about a film that went wrong, great epic that killed a studio. This was the opposite way around. Everyone said it was going to be a disaster, and it turned into a triumph. Which is a great arc, but quite a hard one to write in some respects, because it's not full of kind of drugs and it's not like Easy Riders Raging Bulls. It's not full of kind of backbiting and scurrilous discussion. It's a story of these kind of Kiwis who did the impossible and how they did it. And that was kind of the way I wanted to go about it. And I also had that, the other thing in writing the book that you're burdened with is that Jackson had done so many good documentaries with the DVDs. He'd done this fabulous kind of opening up of how they did it. So you're sort of confronted with this sort of set of extras. And I thought, well, what do I do about all of this? And I thought the only thing I could do was to go even deeper. So it was like you take a story that everyone knows, like the 11th hour casting of Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn. Everyone knows that happened. That's kind of folklore. But all I needed to do was tell that story with as much detail as anyone could, beyond just, we got Viggo and he worked. I did all the different phone calls, where Viggo was, the timing, what was shooting on the set in New Zealand at the time. I just did everything. And that's why it's so long, because you go into so much detail.
Gotcha.
But I wanted to tell that story. And those films are very important to people, and they're very important to me. And I still get people emailing me and contact me via social media, just going, I love your book, because it just brings those films back to me. And and I didn't know everything, and that's always the biggest relief when people go, oh, you told me something new. Because even with like the documentaries like Aliens, you worry that your biggest concern is that you're telling people what they already know, and you kind of have to wrestle and make your peace with that yes, you're going to do a lot of that, but hopefully you're telling it, as I say, in a more in-depth and interesting way.
Gotcha. Well, hey, Ian, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it.
No, great pleasure. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the Thing Expanded coming out soon. I am definitely going to pick up a copy of your Peter Jackson book as well. Thank you so much, and I appreciate all the work you did at Empire as well, because I probably read more of your articles than I realized I knew who you were.
All right, cheers.
Thank you. Hey, Ian, this is going to air